Dr. Chris Palmer is taking the internet by storm and for good reason. He's a Harvard psychiatrist and researcher, and his new book, Brain Energy, proposes a comprehensive theory of what causes mental illness, integrating existing theories and research into one unifying theory, the brain energy theory of mental illness, in which he argues that mental disorders are really metabolic disorders of the brain. His message is one of empowerment and hope, and he tells multiple stories of recovery and remission. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Chris Palmer to the show. I know you guys are going to love this one. Dr. Palmer, you're so popular right now. Your book, Brain Energy, came out. It's a beacon of hope, all about mental illness being a mitochondrial disease. And that is coming from the place of blood sugar balance and knowing the importance of mitochondrial health for energy. It empowers me to share this message with my audience and to let them get rid of the stigmas and the labels and to know there's so much hope. So thank you for spending your
Well,
time.
thank you for all the work you've been doing, and thank you for having me on.
It's my pleasure. Your book was phenomenal, and it really shed light on the rise we're seeing in mental illness. And I'd like for you to discuss that. But first, I want to get started. I know you've shared this story on other podcasts, but your why, because our why is always really important. Why did you get into this field? Why did you become so interested in learning more about the potential causes of mental illness? And what's your personal story?
So, probably too much to share, but it's a long story. But you know, I've been asked numerous times over the years, why am I a psychiatrist? And the real answer is that I had my own personal struggles with mental illness for a long time, since young child to early adulthood, until I finally figured it all out for myself. And that has actually helped me be a much better psychiatrist. But in reality, that wasn't the real reason I became a psychiatrist. The real reason I became a psychiatrist was because of my mother. And not in a blame shame way that we always blame our mothers and she messed me up or something. It was she she ended up developing a psychotic disorder in midlife for her around the age 42, and initially sought mental health treatment. Was hospitalized, saw a psychiatrist, took the pills, did the psychotherapy, did everything she was asked to do. She knew there was something wrong. And the mental health field was unable to help her. And her life ultimately was decimated.
Mm.
Um, and it kind of really decimated our family, had dramatic impacts on all of the kids in our family. And, I'm from a big family of 8 kids. And at the end of the day, I was actually really furious with the mental health field
Mhm.
for being so incompetent. I was just initially kind of in disbelief, like, what's wrong with you people? There's something wrong with my mom. You're supposed to be doctors. Why aren't you making her better? And she's doing everything you're asking. Don't you people have brain scans or treatments or something that can help her? And the reality is, no, they didn't. And still to this day, for literally millions of people, we don't.
Mhm.
Millions of people go through the same thing that I went through, you know, almost 40 years ago. Or actually over 40 years ago. I'm dating myself. But uh and it's actually tragic and heartbreaking that we can't get people with serious mental illness better.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, we'll stop there. That's my why.
Well, I'm sorry that you went through that trauma as a child. I think you've really made, I mean, it's you've healed yourself through action and being able to uncover and research and get to the point of saying, we have better answers. We know what's happening in the brain, and we don't need to be labeled and medicated. We need to get to the root cause. And that's what you do in your book. And that's what your message is sharing across multiple podcasts around the world now. So thank you for your work. And I'm sorry that you went through that. My dad is one of 8, and his mom self-medicated depression with alcohol and ultimately killed herself and with an alcohol overdose. My dad has been sober since I was 5 and is happy-go-lucky and feels great. I mean, he actually is golfing right now as we speak. And I love knowing that he wears a CGM. I have him on a level CGM tracking his blood sugar and focusing on his health. But like I said in the beginning of the podcast, it's so empowering to know that we have agency over our mental health through our physical health and how we take care of ourselves and our mitochondria. So let's jump into that. So you talk about your metabolic theory of mental illness, and that mental illness really is a mitochondrial disease and an energy disease of the brain. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so to a lot of people, this is gonna sound brand new, it's gonna sound shocking. They may think that I've pulled this out of thin air or that I'm speculating, that this is just a wild speculation on Chris Palmer's part. Because we hear wild speculative theories all the time. And in fact, to most people's shock and amazement, this theory is simply taking decades and decades of evidence, neuroimaging research, all of the neuroimaging research we've been doing, decades of basic science research in people with mental illness, decades of brain research, decades of metabolic research, genetic research. Like when researchers have been looking at the genetics of mental illness and trying to figure out what do these genes do? Why are people becoming mentally ill? What exactly are these genes doing in the brains of people with mental illness? All of that research converges in one and only one place, and that is the tiny little things in our cells called mitochondria. And so most people know mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell, meaning they take food and oxygen and they turn it into ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. And there's no doubt they do that. That function is critical. And that function actually can explain a lot of the symptoms of mental illness. But that function alone is not sufficient to explain everything that we know about mental illness. So we also know so many other things about mental illness, that people with mental illness tend to have neurotransmitter imbalances, hormonal imbalances. They can have higher levels of inflammation. Maybe it's something to do with a gut brain connection, the gut microbiome. That's a really hot topic right now. But there are genetic and epigenetic differences. And how can we make sense of all of that? And the reality is that the the topic of mitochondria in biology is an exploding, cutting edge field. We are learning new things every single day in this field. And the functions of mitochondria go so far beyond just energy production. They play critical roles in all of the things that I just said. And I'll stop there and let you direct how we wanna have this conversation, because I could just talk forever on this.
No, that's why you're here. I want you to. I want to know about the other things that are coming out that mitochondria do. I mean, I remember just recently I read a stat that in every ovarian cell, it's 600,000 mitochondria would be considered a healthy, robust mitochondrial cell. In a brain cell, how many mitochondria on average do you see? And other than producing energy, what else are they doing?
So, brain cells, it starts getting really complicated quickly. So, brain cells include neurons,
Mhm.
which can be extraordinarily massive, long cells. Some of our brain cells extend from our brain. They can sometimes go down to the spinal cord. And so they can actually be meters long cells. Um, other brain cells are glial cells or support cells, which are smaller but play a pivotal role in the function of the brain. The brain cells, the brain has its own type of immune cell, and so there are lots of different types of cells. And so the number of mitochondria in each of those cells is widely variable depending on the size and the function of those cells. It can range anywhere from hundreds of mitochondria to thousands of mitochondria. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't know about mitochondria is that they're actually not just stationary little power factories. Mitochondria, it's like a city unto itself. At if you look at a living cell and they can stain mitochondria or fluoresce them so that they glow, and you can actually see them. They're moving around cells, they fuse with each other, they bud off with each other. They are busy. They're doing so many things in a cell. Um, and for those of you who don't know it, mitochondria were actually once independent living organisms. And so I'm talking about them as though they're living things. And in fact, they used to be an independent living organism. They used to be a bacterium. And so now, one new way to think about our cells is that they are populated by these little kind of cities of or colonies of mitochondria who are busy going around the cell doing all sorts of maintenance functions and helping that cell do what it's supposed to do. So, in terms of the mental health field, a lot of people know mental illness is all about neurotransmitters, right? It's about serotonin or it's about dopamine, too much dopamine or not enough dopamine or norepinephrine. It's about those neurotransmitters, right? What does that have to do with mitochondria? Well, turns out it has everything to do with mitochondria. Mitochondria actually create the building blocks for many of the key neurotransmitters, including serotonin, dopamine, GABA, glutamate, some of the major powerful neurotransmitters that we know play a role in mental illness. Mitochondria are right there to produce the building blocks that get used to make those neurotransmitters. Mitochondria actually regulate the overall production of those neurotransmitters, and they regulate the release of those neurotransmitters. There are research studies showing that mitochondria actually move along the membrane of the synapse to release batches of neurotransmitters. And if you take the mitochondria out of the synapse, those neurotransmitters don't get released. So I just want to take a step right there with neurotransmitters because a lot of people think of mental illness as a neurotransmitter imbalance, right? That's what it
Yeah.
is. It's a chemical imbalance. Well, if you ask the simple question, well, what could possibly be causing this chemical imbalance? You must think about and talk about and understand the role of mitochondria in the production and regulation and release of those neurotransmitters in order to possibly be able to even begin to answer that question. Um, Mitochondria also play a critical role in the production, regulation, and release of some key hormones like cortisol, that stress hormone, but also estrogen and testosterone and progesterone. And those hormones end up having profound impacts on brain metabolism and body metabolism. And that means that they are also, those hormones, they're being produced by mitochondria, but then they're actually affecting mitochondria in other cells. They're telling other cells to go or stop, basically. And when they tell those other cells to go or stop, one of the pathways that's happening is that the mitochondria are going or stopping as a result of those signals. And so, in many ways, we know that hormones like cortisol, hormones like estrogen, are related to mental illness. So,
Mhm.
some women, for instance, will have symptoms around the time of their periods. Some women will have postpartum depression. Some women will have menopausal depression or mania or psychosis. And we can begin to understand why are women more vulnerable to mental health symptoms around those hormonal changes? We can begin to understand that once we begin to understand the role of mitochondria and metabolism with those hormones and that those hormones have on, other cells. Mitochondria play a direct role in inflammation, turning it on and off. But here's the thing. I know a lot of you are probably thinking, oh my God, this guy is a science nerd. He just cares about cells and biology. And we all know that mental health is a lot more complex than that. Mental health is about trauma and
Mhm.
abuse or loneliness
Mhm.
or bullying and teasing on the playground. That's what mental health is about. It's about those things. It
Mhm.
is not all biology.
Mhm.
What I'm here to tell you is that those things have a direct effect on the stress system of the human body. And that does change our physiology and biology. And if you do a deep dive into the science of even that, what exactly, how is this stress response orchestrated throughout the human body? You have to think about and talk about mitochondria because mitochondria have been found to play a role in all four. There, right now, we kind of think of the stress response as having four big buckets. This cortisol release is one of them. Adrenaline release is another one of them. Inflammation is one, and epigenetic changes in the hippocampus and some other brain regions are another. So, four different parts of the human stress response. So, this is when you're getting bullied and teased. Those four things are happening to that person, and mitochondria play a role in all of them. So, one way to think about it, although some people hearing this may think, "Oh, this sounds crazy. I've never heard of any of this. This can't possibly be true. Why hasn't anybody told me this before?" Number one, it's all cutting edge research. A lot of it has only been discovered in the last 20 years. And to date, in the mental health field, as far as I have seen, nobody has been able to put it together in a coherent way, in the way that I have done in brain energy. And I'm open to, maybe I made some mistakes along the way. I'm open to editing the theory. I'm open to criticism and feedback and refinement of the theory because I really did my best with a first pass. But what I will say is that, for people who are skeptical, because I'm just going to assume everybody's you have to be skeptical because it sounds too impossible. Um, People who are skeptical, just want to say the book has actually been endorsed by, I think, like 15 leading psychiatrists, neuroscientists, physicians, and others. So people who really know this field extraordinarily well, some of the leading experts have publicly endorsed this book. And so I'm not completely crazy. I haven't totally made it all up. I must have gotten something right. And but this theory helps us finally, once and for all, connect the dots of mental illness.
Well, it's interesting to me because I'm not in the brain energy space, but I am in the metabolism space and the hormone balancing space and supporting my clients to feel their best and to feel energetic and to feel balanced. And I know how cortisol affects them and how stress affects them. And I can see the downstream effects in their thyroid and in their hormone workups. And I know that mitochondria play a critical role in my ability to support their mitochondria and my ability to support them to hit a lot of the body composition or wellness goals that they have. So, the clarity that you've given me in regards to mitochondria's role of creating precursors and releasing those precursors of very critical hormones and neurotransmitters, it makes sense to me what you're saying, that it goes back to mitochondria. And what I've seen in the metabolism space, in just strictly like the body composition space, is that our environment, whether it's endocrine disrupting chemicals, pesticides, stress, traumas, gut microbiome changes, we've seen, and there's plenty of research. I know we're at the, the tippy top of the iceberg in the very beginning, but there's plenty of research that shows that these are destructive to mitochondria and really in their breakdown. And so if we're looking at the psychiatry space and saying it's a chemical imbalance, well, go to the root cause, right? Go to the engine that's creating these precursors and releasing these neurotransmitters. And if there's a breakdown in the engine, we need to fix the engine like a mechanic. And that's what your book says. So it seems pretty clear to me. I'm not a skeptic, only because I can see how it translates from the body, that we're a holistic being, but from certain body cells like muscle cells to brain cells. So there's hope, I think, is what I'm so excited about from your book. When it comes to mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, bipolar disorder, ADHD, what can we start doing, even though the research is only been in the last 20 years and it is new and exciting to look at brain energy as being the real culprit of, or the real problem? What can we start doing to support brain mitochondria, and how can we start on a path to remission? Because you talk about this in your book.
Yeah. So I think, as you just said, a lot of the strategies to improve metabolic health or mental health are not going to sound very new and cutting edge to a lot of people. They're things that we have known about for a long time. And so we could talk about diet and eating a healthy diet. But I also look at diet as, when we start thinking about fasting, intermittent fasting, and fasting mimicking diets like a ketogenic diet, I think of that as different than just eating a quote unquote healthy diet. I think of those as metabolic interventions or metabolic strategies where we can actually use those strategies to change metabolism, improve mitochondrial health, improve mitochondrial function, and restore people's health and wellness. So, diet is a huge field. Exercise is good for mitochondria, is good for metabolic health. And guess what? It's good for mental health, good sleep, stress reduction, hormonal balance, and making sure you don't have hormonal imbalances, looking for sources of inflammation, chronic inflammation. And this can include a lot of the things you just said. A lot of the environmental toxins may be contributing to mitochondrial dysfunction, might be causing chronic inflammation, but even simple, straightforward things like getting an infection can cause high levels of inflammation. And right now, we've got a world crisis called COVID. And a lot of people are suffering from something called long COVID. in which it appears that some people are not able to fight off the virus completely, and they end up with a chronic COVID infection. That is not 100% established yet, but a lot of lines of research are pointing to that may, in fact, be at least one of the possibilities for long COVID, is that these people are not able to successfully clear all of the virus from their body and brain, and they end up with a chronic infection, and that leads to chronic levels of inflammation, which can end up causing all sorts of problems, including mental health challenges like depression, anxiety, even psychosis, brain fog, other things. Um, so by no means do I want people to take away from this that it's all simple. Chris Palmer saying just eat broccoli and that will make schizophrenia go away. That's not what I'm saying. But on the other hand, what I'm saying is that this is a solvable puzzle even today for most people. We can use all of those types of strategies: diet, exercise, sleep, stress reduction, getting rid of toxic substances like heavy use of alcohol, for instance, getting rid of those things. Um, and the social and psychological things. Humans need connection. We need a sense of purpose. We cannot just be put in a room with a screen and expect to be happy, healthy human beings. Even if we're eating a good diet, even if we're kind of getting in 15 minutes of exercise, if you're sitting in a chair in front of a screen the entire rest of the day, that's not a good recipe for metabolic or mental health either, because we are human beings. We are designed to be around others. Whether you look at that from a religious or spiritual perspective, or whether you want to look at it from just a purely biological animal perspective, we are animals that live in groups of we are supposed to be around other humans. That is in our biology. We are driven to want to be around other humans and interact with them and be useful to them. And so regardless of how you want to think about that. And then if you want to think about it from a religious or spiritual perspective, obviously I could do a whole sermon on that if you want a sermon, but I won't do that. But again, these aren't brand new interventions. But the great news is that the science is now caught up enough to let us know that many of these interventions can, in fact, help people overcome serious, debilitating mental illnesses. I'm not talking about just eat a clean diet and exercise and you'll feel a little better. I'm talking about, what if you've got crippling, unrelenting depression and you can't feel better and you're chronically suicidal? I'm talking to those people too. I'm talking to people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. You all have metabolic brain disorders, and you can use metabolic strategies to overcome them and live normal, healthy, happy, long lives.
You do a great job in the book of telling stories. Can you give me an example of someone who had a debilitating mental illness and implemented one of these metabolic interventions and the changes that you saw in them and how long it took?
So one case that I'll go ahead and share with you just to let people know, because I can definitely help people with mild depression and anxiety feel better. That's easy for me.
Child's
Those are
play, Dr.
those
Palmer.
are child's play. Those are easy cases for me. You've got brain fog, burnout, mild ADHD. That's easy. I'll share this one case. She is an exceptional case. Um, but I think her story speaks to the power of metabolic treatments and the possibility. So she actually, in the book, I used pseudonyms for everyone. So I changed everybody's real name. All of the people I described in the book are real, but she actually gave me permission to use her real name. So I'm going to use her real name here on the podcast. So her real name is Doris. Doris was a woman who actually had a horrible traumatic childhood, had symptoms of PTSD and depression when she was young. And by the time she turned 17, she began having hallucinations and delusions every day and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Doris tried numerous antipsychotics, mood stabilizing medications over the decades that followed, and they did not work. She was a chronic paranoid schizophrenic. She gained massive amounts of weight, and by the time she was 70, she weighed 330 pounds. She hated her life, she hated herself. Um, she actually tried to kill herself at least 6 times between the ages of 68 and 70. And when she turned 70, her primary care doctor referred her to Duke University weight loss clinic because he kind of realized this is really a real problem. And for whatever reason, she decided to give it a try. And they were using the ketogenic diet as the weight loss method. And that's all they were doing. They had no concept of trying to help a woman with her schizophrenia or anything. They were just trying to help the poor woman lose some weight.
Mhm.
Um, Within 2 weeks, she noticed dramatic reductions in her chronic hallucinations and delusions. Within months, all of her symptoms were in full and complete remission. Within 6 months, she was off all of her psychiatric medications and remained in full and complete remission from chronic 53-year history of schizophrenia. She went on to live for another 15 years, symptom free, medication free, out of psychiatric hospitals, no more suicide attempts, no more mental health professionals. And sadly, she passed away a little bit over a year ago now from COVID pneumonia at the age of 85. Um, she lost 150 pounds and had kept it off, but she regained her function in life. And, when I last spoke with her, she actually said she was happy to be alive, that she actually kind of asked me to share her story with anyone who would listen to it, in the hopes that her story might help even one other person who who suffered the decades of torment that she suffered.
It's it's like body rocking. I have full body chills thinking about 53 years of not finding answers. I'm so grateful that she had 15 years of feeling good and vibrant and excited about life. That's really why I wanted to have you on the show because we joke that it's child's play, but whether it's light depression, severe depression, suicidal thoughts, feeling scattered, like you have a diagnosis of ADHD, you want to have control over that. You don't want to just take a prescription and say, "Oh, this is just what I was handed in life." You want to know that there's something else you can do. Can you talk about, because I want people to know the mechanism of action here too. Can you talk about why the ketogenic diet, a metabolic intervention diet, had such an effect on Doris's brain and her mitochondria?
Yeah. So a lot of people know the ketogenic diet as a weight loss diet, or maybe as even an intervention to reduce your blood sugars, improve your blood sugar control. Um, but in fact, my great interest in the ketogenic diet is not in those things. It kind of has been in those things for 20 years. But the most fascinating aspect of the ketogenic diet for me as a psychiatrist is that it is an evidence-based treatment for epilepsy.
Mhm.
And it's 100 years old actually now. So this diet can stop seizures even when medications fail to. And we have lots of medical evidence, randomized controlled trials, and other types of evidence documenting how and why this diet stops seizures. The reason that's so important to me as a psychiatrist is because we use epilepsy treatments in psychiatry every day in tens of millions of people. A lot of medications that people have heard of are actually epilepsy treatments, but they usually think of them as mental health or psychiatric treatments because we use them a lot more commonly in the mental health field. Um, so what do we know about this diet and what may it have been doing to help Doris recover? So we know some really basic things like this diet changes neurotransmitter systems, it reduces inflammation, it changes calcium channel signaling, which stabilizes brain cells and the function of brain cells. It, it results in epigenetic changes. But I didn't stop there. In developing this theory, I went, well, how are those things even connected? Like, what is there a unifying link with all of those things? How could one intervention do all of those different things? Neurotransmitters, calcium, hormones, epigenetics. And at the end of the day, the answer comes down to mitochondria. So, this diet, a lot of people think of it, one way to think about it, the simplest way to think about it, which I actually don't think is fully correct, but it doesn't hurt to think of it in this way, is that people with mental illness um, have often been found to have something called glucose hypometabolism in their brain. What that means is that their brain cells aren't getting enough energy from glucose. And so the simplest way to think about the ketogenic diet is that it provides an alternate source of fuel, ketones, to those brain cells. So those brain cells are struggling, they're not getting quite enough energy, and that means they're not functioning properly. It also means that they're not able to maintain themselves optimally because they don't have enough energy. They are struggling to get by. They're doing their best they can, but they are not functioning and maintaining themselves properly. And that can sometimes mean a downward spiral, a progressive, chronic, debilitating illness. If your brain cells aren't maintaining themselves and they're getting worse and worse over time, that means your illness, your brain health is getting worse and worse over time. So, ketones are a fuel source. The much bigger thing in my mind, though, is that this diet actually stimulates two processes related to mitochondria, something called mitophagy and something called mitochondrial biogenesis. So I'll explain what those two terms mean. So mitophagy is kind of like autophagy. It's basically getting rid of old and defective mitochondria and replacing them with new ones. So that is one of the biggest challenges in the mentally ill is that there are numerous lines of research all suggesting these people have defective, dysfunctional mitochondria in their brain cells. And we need a way to clear those out and replace them with new, healthy ones. The ketogenic diet does exactly that. But on top of that, this other thing called mitochondrial biogenesis. Essentially, what that means is you make more mitochondria so that your brain cells, if one of your brain cells has, say, 1,000 mitochondria before the ketogenic diet, but that brain cell is kind of struggling. It's struggling because it's only got 1,000 mitochondria and they're doing the best they can, but that cell really ideally needs 1,400 mitochondria. That's what biogenesis is all about. That cell may start producing more mitochondria so that at the end of a process, and that process unfortunately is not overnight. I have to be honest with you, it can take, in the epilepsy field, we usually have people do the diet. It's not a lifelong diet for most people. It can be a lifelong diet for some people if they have rare genetic problems or something. But for most people, it ends up being a diet that they have to follow for 2 to 5 years. And that 2 to 5 years is the time that it takes for those brain cells to get rid of the old defective mitochondria, replace them with new ones, and end up producing enough mitochondria so that those cells become healthy and functional. So that if you eat a normal diet, a quote unquote normal diet with more carbohydrates in it, you can manage. You can manage that, and that cell can then use glucose as a fuel source more effectively. So that's one of the beautiful things about the ketogenic diet is for most people, it's not necessarily a lifetime treatment. It is a treatment that heals, that restores mitochondrial health, and that restores normal brain function. And then the person can kind of live happily ever after. They're probably always going to be a little more vulnerable because they've had a serious brain disorder before or they've had a metabolic problem before. So I think they're always going to be a little more vulnerable. Um, but if they start noticing symptoms coming back, they can get right back on that treatment plan. They can re-implement the ketogenic diet or exercise or prioritize sleep or get rid of those substances that you started using that pushed you over the edge. It's all a work in progress. It is about empowerment and hope and healing.
I mean, I just have such a visual thinking about all the different types of brain cells, from neurons to glial cells to cells. I'm just thinking about all of them and their mitochondrial load. And to think that it would only take, I'm thinking, wow, it would only take 2 to 5 years to have a full system upgrade. And to know that even if you're coming off of, I think, for example, I sometimes work with women who look back on, or men who look back on the college years. And they say there's more alcohol than I'd like to admit there, or I didn't sleep very well, or I pushed myself in my classes and I didn't, I was stressed. I didn't focus on my health. I ate things out of packages. But to think that we have so much power, pun intended, to fully rejigger, like re-upgrade our brain like a Mac, like, operating system is so powerful. It's so exciting. And it gives people action. I mean, I love, I go back to the body side of things, and I'm not the expert in the brain, but autophagy, knowing that fasting and the ketogenic diet can support autophagy and the rebuilding of those cells. It's the same thing that's happening in the brain with mitochondria. So,
Yes.
is there anything outside of the ketogenic diet that has this amazing ability to have, a full breakdown and rebuild of mitochondria? Or what are some other lifestyle factors people can include? Like, how do you feel about ketone esters supporting that? How do you feel, um, about specific mitochondrial supporting supplements, like urolithin A, for example, if you're familiar with Timeline
I
and MitoPure? When you look at those from your space, from a brain health space, what do you suggest people start implementing, and what sort of not a needle mover for you?
So right now, quite honestly, I am focused primarily on natural, healthy lifestyle interventions. So a huge
The
game
pharma companies are
changer.
going to love you. They're like, there's no money in Chris Palmer's
I'm sorry.
research.
I have had people tell me that. I have had really good friends who are biotech investors and healthcare venture capitalists, and they do tell me that. They're like, "Chris, but where's the money in this?" And I'm like, "Well, there isn't. I just wanna help human beings." Like,
I love
what's
you.
wrong with
That's
that? Wha
awesome.
what is wrong with that? No, you need a molecule, Chris. You need a
No,
molecule like
right.
urolithin A or something. You need a molecule that you can sell. And I'm like, but why do I need a molecule if I can help people with lifestyle strategies?
You
So,
don't.
um, and I'll talk about the supplements in just a second. But for the most part, I'm putting most of my money on healthy lifestyles, actually getting rid of as many pills as possible. So, prescription meds dysregulate mitochondrial function, dysregulate metabolism. In the mental health field, we have lots of prescriptions that harm metabolism. And that may sound shocking to hear a Harvard psychiatrist say that, but this is not at all surprising whatsoever. If you know anybody who's taken these pills, or if you even read the package insert issued by the Food and Drug Administration, weight gain,
Yep.
type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, increase in cholesterol, bad like LDL cholesterol, increase in triglycerides, increase in blood pressure from the pills alone. In the elderly, it is well documented premature mortality, excess mortality from these pills. Those all suggest things that are harming your metabolism, which means harming your mitochondria at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And so I'm a big fan of slowly but surely. You cannot stop those pills cold turkey. Please don't stop those pills on your own. Please work with a healthcare provider to do that in a safe way, because your body makes adaptations. And if you try to get off them too fast, you'll end up in the hospital, or the police are going to get called, or you're going to be suicidal and depressed or manic or something, or possibly dead. And people kill themselves or get killed in these kind of states when they try to stop their meds too fast. So please don't stop your meds on your own. Don't stop them too fast. Even though I'm saying I do want people to try to get off their meds when possible. And that is something that I actively do with most of my patients. Um, so other lifestyle things, again, common sense things. Exercise, huge for mitophagy and mitochondrial biogenesis. Exercise is uh, massive for mitochondrial biogenesis. We have decades of research, not only in your muscles, so not only in your physical body, and I'm a brain person and I'm a mental health person. So I'm talking, I work with people who are vulnerable, ostracized, tormented by symptoms. Yeah, I'd love to look good, and I would love for all my patients to look good and be sexy and be healthy and all of that. Sure, why not? But that is not my intention whatsoever. My primary goal is to help restore their brain health so they aren't tormented by their symptoms. And that means exercise. That means getting those muscles bigger and stronger with more mitochondria. And the side effect of my treatment is that you are gonna look better. You are you are gonna be faster and stronger and all of those things. And what's not to love about it? But it's not about vanity. It's not about, any of that. Um, but sometimes it's really about the things that we're not doing, that we like. Sleep. Sleep is huge. On average, most Americans aren't getting an adequate amount of sleep. A lot of people stay up really late. They're on screens all night, whether it's Netflix or video games or their phone. And then they're not getting an adequate amount of sleep. They're waking up to an alarm. They're pushing the snooze button several times and dragging themselves out of bed and going through the day. That is not a recipe for good mental or metabolic health. Getting to bed early, waking up before your alarm goes off, or not even setting an alarm because you're going to wake up so much earlier. I have to tell you that it is life changing when I've did that. I used to be one of those people who stayed up late, pushed the snooze button. If you can get in a sleep routine where you're actually getting an adequate amount of sleep, it is like it's amazing how much better life is, how much better you feel, how much more productive you are. Everything, like, the staying up late and watching those Netflix shows doesn't seem worth it anymore, when you think about the benefits you get, avoiding harmful substances, like alcohol and marijuana and, smoking and vaping. Those things aren't good for your mental health, they're not good for your metabolic health. I'm really sorry if I'm raining on people's parades, but but I'm here to rain on your parade, just give you accurate information, and you can do with it what you will. In terms of supplements, the supplement field is nothing new.
Mm.
Researchers have known about mitochondrial dysfunction oxidative stress, reactive oxygen species for decades now. We've known about it for decades. And we've been trying so many supplements in the hopes that we could stop this process. And the biggest example are antioxidants. So
Mhm.
things like vitamin E, vitamin C, other antioxidants. They were for a long time, researchers held so much hope because we knew that oxidative stress was a primary driver of mental and metabolic illnesses. And so it made sense that, well, let's give antioxidants
Mhm.
and that might solve the problem. Very sadly, for the most part, taking antioxidant pills doesn't seem to solve the problem. And in fact, some research, I just came across a study today. Vitamin C. What's not to love about vitamin C, right? Vitamin C is an antioxidant and it prevents mitochondrial biogenesis in muscle cells.
Oh,
So
jeez.
so to help people understand that is because on the surface it may not make sense. To help people understand that is, you know, too much reactive oxygen species, which is what we call oxidative stress.
Mhm.
That is a bad thing. That
Mhm.
all comes from your mitochondria. If your mitochondria are defective or if your mitochondria are overwhelmed with like too much glucose, if you're
Mhm.
eating lots of glucose, that you will overwhelm your mitochondria and they will start producing more reactive oxygen species. And that's a bad thing. The reason that high doses of vitamin C don't seem to be helpful is because low levels of reactive oxygen species are critical to mitochondrial biogenesis. That
Hormesis.
is hormesis, yes. And that is, for instance, how exercise works. That if you want to grow your muscles and if you want your muscles to be bigger, you have to push them to failure.
Mhm.
When the moment you push your muscle to failure, you're actually causing your muscle mitochondria to create reactive oxygen species. That's what they're doing. That's why the muscle is failing, is the mitochondria are saying, "Can't do anymore. This is all we've got. We don't have any more to give." And if you're really pushing yourself to failure, you're going to push those mitochondria to create some reactive oxygen species, at least a low-ish level of it.
Mhm.
That low-ish level of it stimulates the cell to make more mitochondria. That is part of the signal to the cell, hey, we don't have enough mitochondria to manage the workload that this person needs to do. He needed to lift that 50-pound object 20 times and he wasn't able to do it. So we are going to need more mitochondria so that next time he has to lift that 50-pound object 20 times, he can do it. That is the adaptation, is that that muscle cell is going to get more mitochondria. That's going to help that muscle cell become bigger. It's going to help that muscle cell have more endurance and more strength. But if you block, if you flood the system with antioxidants, it can sometimes interfere with that hormesis process. And so with supplements, I just have to say it's all about balance and timing them in an appropriate way. You don't want to overdo them, but you also don't want to underdo them. Obviously, if you've got vitamin or nutrient deficiencies, if you're deficient in any of these things, you very well probably do need supplementation at least for a time to bring your stores back up, or you need to look at why am I deficient in these nutrients and should I change my diet up a little, or should I change my supplement regimen or vitamin regimen? So I'm not anti-supplement, but the supplement story gets complicated quickly because of like what I just said with vitamin C. It gets complicated quickly. Like it seems like a good thing and then sometimes it ends up being a bad thing.
Well, I mean, that what you just said makes perfect sense to me. If we need a little bit of stress or hormesis to create that reactive oxygen species that then tells our cells, hey, we need more machinery here to, we can't do it alone. But all of a sudden, we're blunting that stress on our mitochondria with supplementation. It makes sense that you just wouldn't want to be taking or doing that around the time you're lifting weights and trying to produce mitochondria. And this might be a total reach and a Kelly theory here, but is the ketogenic diet because it is, even though it's a cleaner fuel, ketones for mitochondria, it is can be a stress for our mitochondria to use fat as fuel over glucose because glucose is so easy. Is the ketogenic diet a small form of hormesis on brain cells?
The ketogenic diet is definitely a form of hormesis on the entire body. And that, again, we want that hormesis.
Right.
So the easiest example of the hormesis is actually in the liver, because the liver is the place where ketones are made.
Mhm.
And guess where those ketones are made? They're made by mitochondria in the liver. So the liver mitochondria are actually taking fat and other fuels and making ketones out of them. And then those ketones are fueling brain and other cells. So we know that when people do a ketogenic diet, liver mitochondria are ramping up rapidly because those liver cells are thinking, whoa, whoa, like we've got a crisis here.
No
This
energy. Yeah.
there's no energy. This body we need to start cranking out ketones, and we need more workers or mitochondria to do all of this work. That ends up making those liver cells much more resilient and much more adaptable. The brain, it gets more complicated, but yeah, we have fairly good evidence that the brain is um, undergoing similar changes in terms of mitophagy and mitochondrial biogenesis in a wide variety of brain cells from the ketogenic diet. Um, I'll have to say though, in terms of your question, like, can the ketogenic diet be stressful? In some ways it can, especially the bigger stress that I've seen tends to be in women, and it tends to be around hormone production.
Mhm.
So the ketogenic diet, um, when people are in ketosis, especially high levels of ketosis, your body actually thinks that you are fasting. It's the
Mhm.
same signal as fasting
Mhm.
is. And for the most part, we see a wide variety of effects on hormonal systems, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, while people are in ketosis. But my overall sense, we don't have really rigorous research data on this, and I hope people are gonna start doing that research. But my sense is women tend to be more vulnerable, so
Mhm.
that some women do seem to experience hormonal changes related to a ketogenic diet because their body thinks it's fasting. And my wild speculation, um, just trying to understand, like, why would that even happen or how would that make sense? My speculation is that a woman's body senses there's not you're fasting,
Why
or
reproduce?
you don't have, yes, so it's not time to reproduce. It is time to not reproduce, and like, reproducing would be dangerous right now because you don't have enough food for yourself, let alone enough food to grow a baby for 9 months. Like, reproducing is a 9-month commitment. It's and so the body may actually be making that adaptation to try to prevent pregnancy
Mhm.
while it's in ketosis. But you know,
Yeah.
with that said, I have lots of women who are on a ketogenic diet for their brain health. It can work miracles, just like it did for Doris, like I described. So I'm not at all saying that women shouldn't do it, but it's another kind of factor to think into some of the nuance of, is this the right fit for me, or can we tweak it somehow, or what do we need to do to make this, to optimize people's health?
Yeah. Well, I know I would just say from experience and practice with working with women, I have no reservations in recommending a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet in premenopausal women who finished having children, who want to lose some weight and feel energetic and feel good in their bodies. I really don't. I feel like for so many of them, it can be really supportive to goals and an increase in just feeling great and energetic. When it comes to young women who are still cycling and potentially considering, having children, I'm a little more sensitive to it. And I think you can do carb cycling around workouts. And I think you can get into the nitty-gritty of if they have had a post-eating disorder or have put their body through traumas and stresses of chronic dieting, and how their body responds to that. I mean, for me personally, I love Dr. D'Agostino's work. I love, so many Walter Longo's work. I mean, there are so many interesting researchers in the space of fasting and the ketogenic diet. And I actually worked with the Epilepsy Foundation and spoke on the ketogenic diet. I mean, now it's 7 and 8 years ago prior to having kids, and loved the way that I felt with slight carb cycling, but mostly in a ketogenic diet, and actually found out I was pregnant with my first son with a ketone strip instead of a pregnancy strip because I was like, these are the highest ketone levels I've ever seen. And I was like, that's
Wow.
weird. What is that? And
Wow, that
ultimately,
is a
my
great
body was
story.
like, we needed more energy. We're making a baby. So I think checking in with yourself and seeing like, how does your body respond to the ketogenic diet? Do you still cycle normally? I slept great. I had, normal cycles through when I dip into low carbohydrates, but that's not everybody, and I am sensitive to that when I work with clients, but you make a great point. And I think for anyone out there just seeing what it feels like to not only rely on glucose as an energy source, even just to dip into that metabolic flexibility and feel the difference in mental clarity is pretty mind-blowing if you've constantly been reliant on glucose sources and loads of carbohydrates every single day.
It is mind-blowing. I remember the first time I was in ketosis and, or at least around that
Yeah.
time, and it really it for me at least, it was life-changing. I did not realize that I could feel this good as a human being. I thought it was impossible. Like, I
Yeah.
saw these other people who had this never-ending energy or positivity, or, like, they could just keep going, and even when they weren't working, they had all this energy to go running or swimming or hiking, and I always kind of looked at them with bewilderment, like, how do they have energy to do all of that stuff? Like, aren't they tired like me?
Yeah.
I'm so tired. I just want to lay on the couch and watch TV. Like,
Yeah.
why are they running?
Yeah.
Um, aren't they must not be working as hard as I am when I'm
Yeah.
working, because I'm just so exhausted and burned out. And then when I was in ketosis, it was, wow, I wanna go run and hike and do all of the other things that they were doing all along, and it's a whole new life.
Mhm.
It really is mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing that we have the power to be happy, healthy people when it may feel like you were born to be a different way.
Oh, I love everything that you're sharing, and just to reference, your earlier sentiment, preach. Share this with everyone, they need to know it. I mean, there are definitely times in your life where you may be able to not be in a fully ketogenic state. I'm pregnant with my 3rd child, I'll breastfeed him, I have little toddlers around. Life is not the same as it was prior to Sebastian and when I got pregnant with him, but it is it is really amazing to think that we can have a full system upgrade in 2 to 5 years, and that there is and even if you're not committing to 2 to 5 years, think about just the healing and regeneration that can happen for your mitochondria when you use these metabolic interventions the way you've detailed in your book. Amazing stories like Doris, like life changing Dr. Palmer. I can't thank you enough for concisely putting this theory into a book that anyone can read. It is no surprise to me that you are being tapped and called to be interviewed all the time. It is such an important message, like we said before, of hope, of empowerment, of just our ability to really have control over our life and live the best version of it. So, wow, I know you're making your mom really proud. Thank you for all of your effort and work over the years and for being here with my audience today.
Thank you, Kelly, for having me, and thanks for allowing me to share all of this with your audience.
It's so awesome. Where can people follow along with you? I'm following you on Instagram, but where can they grab the book? What's your Instagram handle? Where do you like to share the most?
So the easiest place, one-stop shopping for all of it, brainenergy.com. If you go to brainenergy.com, you can learn more about the book. You can order it there if you want. You can follow all of my handles are there for Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can follow me there. You can sign up for our free newsletter, get more information. You can actually do an assessment to assess your mental and metabolic health, where we ask all of those related questions in one comprehensive assessment. So you can kind of see where do I fall right now? How's my mental and metabolic health? What are some areas I might want to focus on?
Such good stuff. We'll put a link to the assessment. Everyone loves a quiz. We want to know where we're at and that we're improving. So, thank you for all of your work and for your time.
Thank you, Kelly.